The night was thick with darkness, and the only source of illumination was the faint glow of the moon. Alex sat behind the wheel of his old pickup truck, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel tightly. He was on a long stretch of deserted road, surrounded by dense forest on either side. The only sound was the rumble of the engine and the occasional hoot of an owl. He had been driving for hours, trying to put as much distance between himself and the city as possible. He needed to clear his head, to escape the suffocating weight of his problems. But now, as he drove deeper into the wilderness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The road twisted and turned, snaking its way through the trees like a black ribbon. Shadows danced on the edges of his vision, and every rustle of leaves made him jump. He told himself it was just his imagination, that there was nothing out there in the darkness. But deep down, he knew he was lying to himself. Suddenly, the engine sputtered and died, leaving Alex stranded in the middle of the forest. He cursed and slammed his fist against the dashboard, but there was nothing he could do. He reached for his phone, but the screen remained blank. No signal, no hope of calling for help. With a heavy sigh, Alex climbed out of the truck and popped the hood, hoping to find some clue as to what had gone wrong. But everything looked normal. Frustrated, he slammed the hood shut and scanned the road ahead. It stretched on into the darkness, seemingly endless. Reluctantly, Alex set off down the road on foot, hoping to find help or a place to spend the night. But the deeper he walked into the forest, the more the feeling of unease grew. It was as if the trees themselves were watching him, their branches reaching out to grab him. Just when he was about to turn back, Alex stumbled upon an old, abandoned house nestled deep in the woods. It was dilapidated and covered in vines, but it offered shelter from the encroaching darkness. With no other options, Alex pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was just as decrepit as the exterior, with cobwebs covering every surface and the air thick with dust, but it was better than being out in the open. Alex made his way through the dimly lit hallway, his footsteps echoing off the walls. He found himself in what appeared to be a living room, with a threadbare couch and a faded rug covering the floor. A fireplace stood against one wall, its cold hearth staring back at him. With a sigh, Alex collapsed onto the couch and closed his eyes, hoping to get some rest before morning, but sleep eluded him. Every creak of the floorboards made him jump, and every whisper of the wind made his skin crawl. He tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Then, just as he was about to drift off, he heard it. A soft, muffled sound coming from somewhere in the house. Alex froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the noise. It came again, louder this time. A low, guttural moan that sent shivers down his spine. Alex's blood ran cold as he realized he was not alone in the house. Someone, or something, was there with him. With trembling hands, Alex reached for the flashlight he had brought with him and switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty room around him. But there was nothing there, no sign of any intruder. But the moaning continued, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Alex knew he had to get out of there, but fear rooted him to the spot. He was trapped, surrounded by darkness on all sides. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the moaning stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Alex's ragged breathing. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then he heard it. Footsteps, coming from somewhere in the house. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that echoed through the empty halls. Alex's heart raced as he realized he was not alone. Without thinking, he bolted for the door, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he ran. He burst out into the night, gasping for breath as he stumbled through the underbrush. But as he looked back at the house, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes gleaming with malice as it watched Alex flee into the night. And as Alex stared back at it, he realized with horror that the figure was not human. With a scream, Alex turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the road, where he collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. He looked back at the house, but it was gone. In its place was nothing but darkness and trees. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Alex stumbled to his feet and made his way back to his truck. He didn't look back as he drove away, putting as much distance between himself and the haunted forest as possible. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing by the side of the road, just at the edge of the forest, was the figure from the house. It watched him go with those same gleaming eyes, a silent promise of horror to come. And as Alex drove on into the rising sun, he knew that he would never forget the true terror of that night drive through the haunted forest. Little did he know, the forest held more secrets than he could have ever imagined. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, the memory of that fateful night faded into the recesses of his mind. But the forest never forgets. And somewhere, deep within its dark heart, the figure waits, waiting for the next unsuspecting traveler to wander into its domain. And when that day comes, it will unleash its true terror upon the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the desolate highway, Mark knew he had made a mistake. He should have listened to his instincts and not taken this shortcut through the woods. But it was too late now. He was committed to the winding road that seemed to lead nowhere but darkness. Mark had heard the rumors about this stretch of road. They said that once the sun went down, the spirits of those who had perished in accidents haunted the area, seeking revenge on anyone foolish enough to venture through. He scoffed at the superstitions, dismissing them as nothing more than stories meant to scare children. But now, as he drove deeper into the heart of the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him like a shroud. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, as if reaching for something just out of reach. The darkness seemed to press in on him from all sides, suffocating him with its weight. Mark tried to shake off his fear, turning up the radio in an attempt to drown out the ominous silence that surrounded him. But even the cheerful tunes couldn't dispel the sense of dread that hung in the air like a thick fog. Suddenly, the radio crackled and went dead, leaving Mark in silence. He cursed under his breath, fumbling with the dial in a futile attempt to revive it. But no matter what he tried, the radio remained silent, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the ever-present feeling of being watched. As he rounded a bend in the road, Mark caught sight of something up ahead. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light, but as he drew closer, he realized with a sickening lurch in his stomach that it was a figure standing in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a halt just inches from the mysterious figure. It was a woman, her long hair blowing in the wind as she stared at him with empty eyes. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he stared back at her, unsure of what to do. "Are you okay?" he called out, his voice trembling with fear. The woman didn't respond, her gaze unwavering as she continued to stare at him with those vacant eyes. Mark's hands shook as he reached for his phone, intending to call for help, but when he looked back up, the woman was gone, disappearing into the darkness as if she had never been there at all. Shaken but determined to press on, Mark put the car back into gear and continued down the road, his mind racing with questions. Who was that woman? And where had she come from? And more importantly, why had she been standing in the middle of the road like that? As he drove deeper into the forest, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Every shadow seemed to hide some lurking presence, and every rustle of leaves set his nerves on edge. He glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman from before staring back at him. But there was nothing there but darkness. Just when Mark thought he couldn't take it anymore, he saw a glimmer of light up ahead. Relief flooded through him as he realized it was the end of the forest, the road opening up onto a small clearing bathed in moonlight. He pressed down on the accelerator, eager to put the horrors of the forest behind him. But as he emerged from the trees, Mark's relief turned to horror. The clearing was empty, devoid of any signs of life. There were no other cars, no people, nothing but the silence of the night. Confused and terrified, Mark brought the car to a stop, his mind racing with possibilities. Had he taken a wrong turn somewhere? Was this even the same road he had been on before? Before he could make sense of it all, he heard a sound coming from the darkness behind him. It was a whisper, soft and barely audible, but filled with a sense of malice that sent shivers down his spine. "Turn back," it said, the word sending a chill through Mark's bones. "Turn back before it's too late." Mark's heart hammered in his chest as he stared into the darkness, unsure of what to do. Every instinct screamed at him to heed the warning and flee, but something held him rooted to the spot, unable to move. As he hesitated, the whispering grew louder, filling his ears with a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from all around him. They spoke of death and darkness, of souls lost to the forest and never found again. With a sudden burst of courage, Mark slammed his foot down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward as he sped away from the clearing and back into the safety of the forest. But no matter how fast he drove, the whispers followed him, echoing in his ears like a haunting melody. For hours, Mark drove through the night, the forest closing in around him like a suffocating blanket. He was lost, disoriented, unsure of where he was or how to escape the nightmare that had become his reality. Just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, he saw a glimmer of light up ahead. It was the end of the forest, the road opening up onto a small clearing bathed in moonlight. Relief flooded through him as he realized he had finally found his way out. But as he emerged from the trees, Mark's relief turned to horror once again. The clearing was empty, devoid of any signs of life. There were no other cars, no people, nothing but the silence of the night. Desperate and afraid, Mark brought the car to a stop, his hands shaking as he tried to make sense of it all. How had he ended up back here again? Was this some kind of cruel joke, or had he truly fallen victim to the spirits of the forest? As he sat there in the darkness, the whispering returned, louder and more insistent than ever before. It spoke of death and despair, of a fate worse than anything he could imagine. And as Mark listened, he realized with a sinking feeling in his stomach that he was not alone. With a sudden burst of terror, Mark turned to look out the window, only to come face to face with the woman from before. Her eyes were no longer empty but filled with a hungering madness that sent a chill down his spine. "Join us," she whispered, her voice like ice against his skin. "Join us in the darkness." With a cry of fear, Mark slammed his foot down on the accelerator, the car lurching forward as he sped away from the clearing and back into the heart of the forest. But no matter how fast he drove, he could not escape the whispers that followed him, their words echoing in his mind like a never-ending nightmare. And as the darkness closed in around him, Mark knew with a sickening certainty that he would never escape the horrors of the Whispering Road. For in the heart of the forest, where the shadows lie deepest, the spirits of the lost and the damned will forever roam, seeking out their next victim to join them in the... The night was dark, the air thick with tension as Ethan gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck. He had heard the stories about this stretch of highway, a desolate road cutting through dense forests, rumored to be haunted by restless spirits. But Ethan was a skeptic. He didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural tales. All he wanted was to get to the other side of the forest before dawn. As Ethan drove deeper into the night, the trees seemed to close in around him, casting eerie shadows across the road. He flicked on the radio, hoping to drown out the silence with some music, but all he could find was static. Unease settled in his gut like a heavy stone. Suddenly, something darted across the road, too quick for Ethan to see clearly. He slammed on the brakes, heart pounding in his chest. Was it an animal? or something else entirely. Cautiously, Ethan stepped out of the truck, peering into the darkness. There was nothing but the sound of his own ragged breath. He shook his head, chalking it up to fatigue and nerves. But as he climbed back into the truck and started the engine, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Miles passed in silence, each one feeling longer and more oppressive than the last. Ethan tried to focus on the road ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to the stories he'd heard about this place. The disappearances, the strange sightings, the inexplicable accidents. Suddenly, his headlights illuminated something in the distance. A figure standing by the side of the road. Ethan's blood ran cold as he approached, the figure growing clearer with each passing second. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her hair wild and unkempt. But it was her eyes that chilled him to the bone, dark and empty, like the void itself. Ethan slowed to a stop, heart pounding in his chest. "Are you okay?" he called out, voice trembling. The woman didn't respond, only stared at him with those haunting eyes. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew he should drive away, leave her behind in the darkness, but something compelled him to stay. "Get in," he said finally, unlocking the passenger door. The woman hesitated for a moment before climbing into the truck, settling into the seat beside him. Ethan tried to ignore the feeling of unease crawling up his spine as he pulled back onto the road. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman didn't answer, only stared out the window with those empty eyes. Ethan glanced at her, feeling a chill run down his spine. There was something off about her, something otherworldly. As they drove on, the silence grew heavier, suffocating in its intensity. Ethan could feel the tension building in the air, like a storm on the horizon. He tried to focus on the road, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman beside him. What was she? And what did she want? Suddenly, the woman spoke, her voice low and raspy. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her words sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, heart pounding in his chest. "This road, it's cursed," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "Those who travel it never return." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He wanted to laugh, to brush off her words as the ramblings of a madwoman, but something in her eyes told him she was serious. "Is that why you're here?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded, her expression solemn. "I've been trapped here for years, unable to find peace," she said. "But you still have a chance to escape." Ethan felt a surge of fear rise up within him. He wanted to turn back, to flee from this place and never look back, but something held him in its grip, a morbid curiosity, the desire to uncover the truth behind the tales. As they drove on, the darkness seemed to grow thicker, pressing in around them like a suffocating blanket. Ethan's hands grew clammy on the steering wheel as he navigated the winding road, each turn more treacherous than the last. Suddenly, the truck lurched to a stop, the engine sputtering and dying. Ethan cursed, frantically trying to restart it, but it was no use. They were stranded, alone in the darkness. Panic gripped Ethan's chest as he glanced out the window, searching for any sign of life. But there was nothing, only the oppressive silence of the forest, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breath. "We have to get out of here," he said, turning to the woman beside him. "We have to find help." But the woman shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No," she whispered. "We have to stay in the truck. It's not safe out there." Ethan wanted to argue, to fight against her words, but something in her voice told him she was right. So they sat in silence, waiting for dawn to break and the darkness to recede. But as the hours passed, Ethan felt a sense of dread settle over him like a heavy cloak. Something was out there, something watching, waiting in the shadows. Suddenly, there was a sound, a low, guttural growl echoing through the darkness. Ethan's blood ran cold as he glanced out the window, searching for the source of the noise. And then he saw it. a pair of glowing eyes staring back at him from the darkness. He felt a scream rise up in his throat, but before he could utter a sound, the creature lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. Ethan fought back with all his strength, but it was no use. The creature was too powerful, too relentless in its pursuit, and as its jaws closed around him, he knew he was lost. Another victim of the haunted highway. As dawn broke and the darkness receded, the forest fell silent once more, leaving behind only the echoes of Ethan's screams and the lingering sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, a woman watched with empty eyes, her soul trapped in an endless cycle of fear and despair. For on the haunted highway, there are no winners, only victims destined to wander its cursed roads